Hello, and welcome back to the Vertical Stride, the podcast where we break down the best principles of training for both the beginner runner all the way to the professional athlete. I am your host, Jack Wren. I'm really excited about today's episode. I have two wonderful guests. Not only are they accomplished runners themselves, they are old friends of mine, old college teammates, and above all, just two delightful human beings. I'm going in alphabetical order here. There is no preference. So I want to welcome Brian and Ryan, which hopefully that doesn't become confusing at all. But welcome, Brian and Ryan. How are you all today? Brian.
I'm doing really wonderfully. It's an honor to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah. Ryan?
I'm doing well, and I'll just say, based on firsthand experience, it's 100% going to be confusing because I've been getting that confused my whole life.
I think that was probably when we would hang out at school. I think I would say one of your names, and I would usually get the attention of both of you. And so we'll see how this goes, but the audience will get to experience firsthand what it was like getting to hang out with both of you, and so it should be a good episode for them.
And
Looking
if I
forward
don't
to it.
if I don't pay attention during this, you're twice as likely to get my attention now.
Exactly. So what could go wrong? I do want to let the audience get a little bit of background about who you all are, and so I'm actually going to go to Ryan first. All right, Ryan, tell us a little bit about some of your current training, what you're training for, what's on the schedule, and maybe a highlight or two from your running journey.
All right, thanks, Jack. So I've been running since I was in sixth grade, so like 11, 12 years old. Been doing cross country and track since then at middle school, high school, and then college at the club level. Now I basically just race marathons. I did the Pittsburgh Marathon in May, and I'm currently training for the Indianapolis Marathon that I'll be doing with Brian. So really looking forward to that. I'm in like the base building stage, so just upping the mileage slowly but surely. What's the last part of that? Something that I'm
A
proud of.
highlight.
A highlight.
Yeah.
Probably running the Boston Marathon. That was incredible cheering experience. One of the best experiences of my life.
Okay. Nice.
And you ran the first 18 miles with me, so of course it was good.
Of course, yeah.
Very nice. Are you all going to run the Indianapolis Marathon together?
That's the hope.
I think
Okay.
we'll all, like, as we do with our marathons, is check in 2 weeks before and see what shape everyone's in and
Okay.
strategize based on that.
Gotcha. Okay. So are you going for a good result in Indianapolis? Do you have a time goal in mind?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I'm hoping to PR at that one.
Okay. And do you want to share what your PR is?
Oh, yeah, of course. My current PR is 2:53,
Okay.
which I ran in Richmond, and I've heard good things about Indianapolis. It's a flat course. I've ran around the city a bit, and I can confirm that. It's also supposed to be cold, which
Yeah.
will be amazing.
Awesome. And then I think so it sounds like this isn't the first marathon that the two of you have run together. Brian, it sounds like you run marathons as well. What are maybe some highlights for you, and then, current training, current running situation?
Yeah, I've run 6 marathons so far, and 3 of them were with Ryan. We ran Richmond, Chicago, and Boston together, which were all really amazing experiences. I feel like Ryan and I are at a very similar sort of ability level, and so it's been really wonderful to sort of have him to race with. And yeah, highlights of my running career. I mean, marathoning has been absolutely wonderful. The atmosphere at a marathon, especially one of the world major marathons, is just unreal. And other highlights are just the years that I spent on club running with all of you. It was a sort of 5-year journey as a graduate student at the University of Virginia, and some of the races that I did, PRing in the 5K, breaking 17 in the 5K, which had been a lifelong goal of mine, was definitely a highlight of my running career. But then also beyond that, just the day-to-day running and racing with friends like you guys.
That's awesome. Are you also going for a PR in Indianapolis?
That's the hope. So my current PR is 2:50:54,
Okay.
and I'm hoping to break 2:50. Training is going pretty well so far, although it's been pretty brutal training in the heat and humidity of the Virginia summer.
Yeah, I was back in Virginia last week running, and it didn't matter what time of day I went. It was like just a pillowcase was over my head, just like holding the heat in.
every summer I forget just how bad like summer in the southeast is, and then the heat and humidity comes back, and it's it's pretty brutal.
Yeah. Well, that will clean up nicely for Indianapolis. And so, let's just call it heat training. We'll call it the poor man's
Nice.
altitude training. And, in the long run, it'll pay off. So,
Absolutely, that's the
Good
hope.
one.
yeah. I honestly, heat training, poor man's altitude training, I think it's great. That's, the primary reason I moved to Arizona, not for anything else. But before we get started on our topic today, right, and I'm going to hold off on what that is for just a moment. I want to do a couple cleanup questions about episode 2, which was how to structure your week, how to put the week together. And so, this is something weigh in on this first question because I think you two also fit the category of who this came from. And it was a marathon friend of mine that said, "Oh my goodness, am I really supposed to be taking my off day on the weekend?" Right? He's like, "Hey, that's my opportunity to really get those miles in." And my response to him was like, "Look, you're running 6 or 7 days a week. You know how to turn your recovery days into recovery days. You know how to keep them easy, and you do need those miles, and so take advantage of the time." But I would be curious what, the two of you as marathon runners yourself, how you feel about, all right, when do I actually want to put in that off day, that day to let my body rest? And we'll go to Brian first on this one.
Sure. So for me personally, I usually take Sunday off. I think it was sort of so ingrained when I started running that, sort of Sunday was like the end of the week and that's sort of your natural rest day. But I absolutely think that you should do whatever works best for you. I think which day you take off doesn't really matter so much. My personal opinion is that you should try to keep it fairly consistent. If you're shooting for one day off a week, but then you structure it so that you are running for 13 days in a row, that might not be what's best for your body in that moment. So trying to stay somewhat consistent, whether it's a Monday or a Wednesday or a Sunday, would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice of consistency from week to week. And we're actually going to loop back to that on the second question. Do you have anything to add, Ryan?
I mean, I'd say it sort of depends on when you do your long run. And I'll also just point out, as Brian said, like, just do what works best for you. That's the good thing about making a running plan to fit your needs. Normally, I do my long runs on Sundays. And so I would take Monday off because it's the day right after. But also, sometimes I want to do a shakeout run the day after a long run so I don't get too sore. So then, whoop, then I'm taking Tuesday off.
Yeah.
I mean, you just sort of decide what's going to work best.
Yeah. Well, and I remember a stretch in college, Ryan, where you and I were actually doing long runs on Friday at the end of the week during COVID because we didn't have organized Saturday, Sunday practice. And so we're like, hey, this is the day that works for us. And so we're going to go out and we're going to get our long run in. And so, yeah, I think whatever works for the schedule that you have and, getting to do the things that you want. And then the second question, which you both started to talk about, and that consistency and kind of that weekly setup, does it need to be pretty static or can you change it? And you talked about having the rest day kind of in the same general location so that you don't get those long stretches of time where you're running. What about like when you put where you put workouts in a week? Do you generally try and keep those on the same days every week? Or is it kind of just, hey, this is the day that's going to work for me? Let's go Ryan first on this one.
I try to keep them on the same day every week. I think just by like the nature of how things fall in is you want to have a couple after you do a workout, then you want to have a couple rest days before your long run, then you want to have a couple rest days before you do your workout. And so things tend to fall when they tend to fall. And so I try to keep things roughly on the same days.
Yeah. And we should when Ryan is saying rest day, he's talking about just like an easy run, right? So Ryan's going out and running for somewhere around 45 minutes to an hour. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be correct. Yeah. But I mean, also you do what you feel. If you feel bad, you move a workout back a day, and then sometimes things shift. But like the same general window, I would recommend.
Yeah. What about you,
Yeah,
Brian?
I would agree. I think there's some value in sort of having a general structure, whether that's, a workout on Tuesday and Thursday and then a long run on Saturday or, kind of whatever the structure is. I think there's some benefit to having a general consistent structure, but also life often gets in the way. I have a 6-month-old baby right now, and there are some times where I've got a workout penciled in on the calendar and I got 3 hours of sleep the night before. And so that workout is not happening. So I think being aware that life is going to get in the way and being able to sort of respond and adapt, it's not the end of the world if you do a workout on a Wednesday instead of a Tuesday.
Right. Well, and honestly, I don't think I could have asked for two better responses from the two of you, because you both touched on the ideas that we want to talk about today. And so I'm super excited. I'm going to be able to relate back to these. And so should be a really great conversation. Today, we are going to be talking about this idea of slow to go fast, just what that means and how that affects your easy runs and your recovery runs. I think this is one of the biggest traps that people can fall into in their training. And so, what I want you, the audience, to know and be able to do after today's episode is have a couple quick tests on, are you falling into this trap? How you can get yourself out of this trap. And then I have two great runners. They are both under 3-hour marathoners. They both have great results in other distances as well. I do want you to be able to hear firsthand from these two runners what this philosophy has done for their running and their training, for both their enjoyment of the sport and their success in this sport. And so I'm really excited. You kind of have an idea of who they are. Ryan gave us the intro of he started running in 6th grade and he's been doing cross country since he was 11 or 12 years old. Ryan, how would you categorize kind of your initial approach to training and running all the way back in middle school when you first started?
I mean, way back then, the goal was just get to the end of the line. Like, I remember just being so proud when I ran 3 miles and 2 people on our team vomited on the same run. I remember their names too. I won't say them here. And then it was the biggest thing in the world to do a 5-mile run. And so I think back then I was just happy to be able to complete those distances. And then in high school things shifted a bit where suddenly there were workouts and training plans and you really had to take consideration to those things. But luckily I had a good coach who made sure that we were taking our easy days very easy and only putting in strong efforts on the workouts.
Okay, so you didn't have kind of the struggle that some people have where you don't really know how to adjust your mentality or approach from day to day?
I mean, I get competitive. So I mean, if I'm running in a group and sometimes people pace push, you have to fight the urge to not always go with them. But I don't always, sometimes I succumb to that urge, but for the most part, I try to keep those easy days easy.
Yeah, and don't worry, we are going to come back to that pace pushing idea in group runs. Brian, I know that your start to running was a little less traditional, a little less structured. Go ahead and give us a little bit of background there. And then also, just because I kind of know a little bit of this answer, fast forward to the first year or so afterwards and what that looked like for you.
Absolutely. So I didn't start running until my senior year of high school. I joined our high school cross country team, and I had a really fantastic coach. He coached multiple regional and state champions and was also just a genuinely really good guy. And his philosophy was all about development, that it's better to slightly undertrain a runner over the course of their 4-year high school career so that they get better year after year. The problem with that was I joined as a senior, and in my mind, I had no time to develop, and I wanted to get good right away. And so what I did is I looked at the top guys on the cross-country team who were naturally faster and fitter than me, and I thought, if I want to be as fast as them on race day, I need to run with them every single day in practice. And so I did my best to do that, and in my running log, I would kind of celebrate every day that I beat one of our top guys in practice. And I did improve a bit over the course of that year, but I also just was tired all the time, was dealing with lots of small injuries, and by the end of track season that spring, felt pretty burned out and considered just stopping running altogether for a while. Eventually kind of rediscovered a love of running and kind of ran on my own for the next 7 years until I went to grad school. And that journey was very eclectic. I didn't really know how to train myself, and so I tried lots of different sort of fad running methods. There's so much information out there, And for me as a young runner, it was hard to know what was actually going to be effective and healthy for my running career.
That's good. I just, your experience actually sounds a little, I have like a mix of the two of you. So I also started in middle school. I started in sixth grade. My school didn't have a middle school team, so I ran with the high schoolers. So I'm in sixth grade. I'm looking at these high schoolers. I'm like, oh, these high schoolers are like the coolest dudes ever. And a bunch of them were really nice and really took me under their wing. But I remember, you know, I'm going to talk about two events in particular. My second day ever of practice, we're out at the state park and we're running 4 miles. You have to go 2 miles out, 2 miles back. So it was an out and back. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, like I want to be fast. I'm going to run with these high school dudes. And, we go out and honestly, they're behind me. And I'm like, what is going on? And I'm like, all right, well, like, let's just see what happens. And then, I realize now kind of jokingly, they were only like 100 yards behind me. And I turned around and, as a joke, they said to me, they're like, you better not let us catch you. And I was like, okay, like I won't, like, it's not going to happen. And then, taking off. And then another time, saying to them, like, yeah, I mean, I just figure if I run hard every day, I'm going to be ready to run hard at the races. I'm going to get better results. I'm going to be in better shape. And let me tell you, I did not have a lot of success in middle school or high school. I got injured a lot. I had like a 4-year stretch where, I kept getting injured. I didn't PR for a long time in middle to high school, which is really tough. Similar to you, Brian, I almost stopped running, but then kind of came back to it and discovered a lot of things and a lot of training philosophies. And so I kind of had a mix of both of those there. And so, we've touched on my next idea of like, what is the trap when we do this? Brian, you said you just felt tired all the time. Running is really tough. It's not fun. Ryan, what were things that you did to kind of avoid that trap, since it sounds like you didn't experience that as much?
Well, my coach was very fanatic, I would say, about making sure we didn't run fast. My sophomore year, we did a time trial in the middle of the summer, and he split all of us up into groups and gave us said every day you can run with your group. Like that's it. These are the people you're running with for the rest of the season. It was me and 2 other people. Like they were small, very small packs. And he would say, easy runs, this is the fastest you can run. Tempos, this is the fastest you can run. Workouts, like you're doing it all together. And then throughout the season, like if you improved or I guess got worse, like he would move people up and down groups, but like you had very concrete paces that you couldn't exceed. And like we sort of took slow to go fast to the extreme where like in high school you have invitationals, but you also just have like the dual meets where you're going one-on-one against another team. And our coach would tell us during the dual meets if we were facing an opponent that wasn't as strong as our team was, he'd say like, just run with their third place runner, make sure you get ahead of him, but don't go all out. Just do like what you need to do to win and like maybe throw a couple strides in there in the last mile. So we were like trained in the philosophy of saving our legs for the biggest races.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brian, what kind of took you to that discovery of slow to go fast? And then, maybe talk about, were there struggles with that when you first started?
So I love to read, and during those years when I was training by myself, I read as many running books as I can. Some books about running training, but also a lot of books about running history. And in the process, just sort of saw the best runners and the best coaches throughout history figuring this out. And, ironically saw them making some of the same mistakes that I had made. But then I think one of the things that was really transformative for me was reading about Coach Bill Bowerman, a legendary coach at the University of Oregon, who was one of the people who introduced jogging to America. The idea that by running slowly, you can get stronger and build your cardiovascular fitness.
I'm going
And
to put you on the spot. Where did he get the idea from?
Arthur Lydiard, a New Zealand running
Yep.
Oh,
legendary
wow.
coach.
Yeah. Very nice.
And that was a really transformative idea. Like I said, I'd sort of been piecing it together and still trying to run as hard as I could, as often as I could, and realizing that I could run slowly and easily and still get better over time was incredible. I feel like I loved running a lot more when I was just going out for a run, enjoying the scenery, and sort of having time to myself to sort of think about what was going on at school or at life. And gradually, there'd be days when I realized, like, I'm feeling really good today. Let me turn this run into a faster sort of tempo run. And so for a while, training was sort of unstructured like that, just really experiencing the joy of it. And then gradually started putting together more concrete running plans and got much better over the course of college. I ended high school with a 5K PR of 21:33. And by the end of college, I was down to 17:14 in the 5K. And a large part of that was just embracing this idea of running slowly, really enjoying it, letting my body recover, but then being fresh enough to run hard on the days where I needed to run hard.
And you pretty much accomplished that running on your own?
Yes.
Wow. That's pretty incredible.
Mhm.
That is a big jump, and those are tough minutes, especially if you're just training by yourself without a super structured plan. That's actually really impressive. Y- You know, I think a lot of us experience something similar. So let's talk about when we're in that process of how do we get ourselves to slow down. Ryan, I know you did a lot of running without a watch for a long
Yes.
time. And so, you talked about your coach gave you paces, but if you were just out running by yourself and it's a recovery day, it's not supposed to be a hard effort, how are you gauging from your body that you are running at an appropriate effort level?
Well, especially when I'm running on my own, I always try to be doing it in the woods or in trails, which I highly recommend if you have access to that. I think it's great for your legs. I think it's great for your ankle health. But when I didn't have a GPS watch, and even when I have a GPS watch now, I find that the tracking isn't very useful there. So I run for time and then just sort of make like an estimate of what my pace is. And when I do that, I sort of rock with like the Badger Miles philosophy, which is if I estimate my pace, sometimes I'm going to underestimate, sometimes I'm going to overestimate, but eventually, like over the law of averages, I'll be roughly around what's right. And so that just taught me like run what you feel and then don't worry about like the exact decimal points of your miles because it's going to work out.
Okay. Brian, do you have anything that you gauge from your body and your effort level separate of the GPS watch to make sure that effort is appropriate?
I I try as much as I can to run on feel. I mentioned the heat and humidity in in Virginia summers is pretty brutal. And so there can definitely be a little hit to the ego when, all of a sudden you're running 30 seconds per mile slower in July than you were in January. And so over time I've learned to sort of accept that and to try to ignore the watch and just listen to my body. Especially again, like I said, if life is stressful because you've been up all night with your baby or you've got a big project at work, you need to sort of listen to your body and adjust accordingly. So, yeah, a big rule of thumb is if you're running with people, a big rule of thumb is could you carry on a conversation at this pace, which isn't always helpful. As my wife likes to tell me, sometimes any pace is hard to carry on a conversation. But that's, a general sort of rule of thumb. And another sort of simple thing that I ask myself is, could I realistically carry this pace for the next 30 minutes or an hour? And if the answer is no, then that's, a sign that I need to sort of slow down.
I have a
Yeah, so
question for Brian.
Yes.
I would hold on to it for a second, Ryan, because I don't want to
Okay.
miss something here. Because, something about the group of the three of us, you mentioned being able to carry that pace for an additional 30 minutes or so. For our beginner runners, where, hey, their entire run might be 30 minutes, because we all have to start there. We all have to get those runs in. We have to get to the point where we can do that 30 minutes. I'm going to press you a little bit on what you mean by listening to your body. What does that mean? Like, what are you looking for? You talk about the talk test, but then you mentioned your wife is like, hey, sometimes just running in general, like you're not going to be able to talk. And so I love the talk test. I'm going to come back to another idea related to that. But what are other things that you're listening to in your body that tell you that this is an appropriate pace?
I think I try to pay attention to my running form. If I realize, hey, all of a sudden I'm leaning way forward, or, hey, all of a sudden, like, my stride is going like much, much smaller, those are kind of cues that, okay, this effort is getting to be a little bit too difficult for me. And I think, especially, if you're a newer runner trying to build up, or I mean, even for veteran runners, there's no shame in slowing down, first of all, but also there's no shame in walking for a little bit. I mean, if the weather is truly awful, or if you're feeling really bad, sometimes, letting yourself stop, catch your breath for a little bit can be what you need to sort of keep going.
I'd add in if your breathing feels under control and also your heart feels under control. And obviously, you might not know like the exact number, but if you're aware of your heart beating fast, then that's, probably a sign that the rate's elevated.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And Brian, you mentioned earlier, there's so many things that you can find and read about running. There's so many different ideas and philosophies. As marathon runners, I'm sure you two are well familiar with kind of the zone 2 running idea. And, this idea that, we have heart rate zones, and for kind of our easy runs or our slow runs, our recovery runs, we want to be in that quote zone 2. And if your heart rate isn't in that zone, you're maybe not where you should be. You know, there's some pitfalls and some dangers with that. And so, Ryan, I think what you said of like, hey, maybe just more of like a general, like, hey, are you aware of your heart? Like, don't
Mhm.
worry quite so much about the number, because it takes a long time for zone 2 running to be really effective and impactful. You have to be, pretty into your training. And by into your training, I mean like years into your training for zone 2 to really apply at its fullest definition. And so, Ryan, I think that's a great point. You also had a question for Brian earlier, Ryan?
Yeah, yeah. And this is a good time for it. Do you run with your baby at all?
I actually have started taking her on stroller runs. I've been logging her mileage. She's up to 20 miles of stroller runs, and she's been really enjoying it. She's at this age where she's really absorbing the entire world. Looking around at the trees or the deer. So it's been really cute taking her for runs, and that's been an interesting exercise too, because your pace is slower because you're
Mm.
pushing the stroller and a baby, and so for me, I think that's another good sort of reminder that you can't just blindly force yourself to follow a certain pace. You've got to take into account other factors like, hey, I'm pushing a baby right now, and sort of adjust accordingly. But yeah,
Well,
it's been a lot of fun.
that brings me to my real question, which is if you notice that your daughter enjoys like zone 4, zone 5 running noticeably more than when you're at a controlled, slow, easy day pace, are you going to wreck an easy day run for that, for your daughter's happiness?
Ooh, that's a good question. For the sake for the sake of running training, I'd say it's very important to maintain the proper pace, Ryan. For the sake of my daughter's happiness, I'm going to go as fast as she needs me to run.
And I noticed that you did not actually answer the question of which one is going to win out when the moment comes.
I definitely think I'm going to throw in some surges if she's finding that enjoyable.
It's funny. I thought Ryan was going to go somewhere else with that. And where I thought Ryan was going to go was, does your daughter enjoy when you sing to her? And if it was just the two of you running, what's maybe like another way that you could kind of test that conversational or that test talk theory? And, you know, if she enjoys when you sing, you could sing a little bit to her. Like, it's the same idea. You should be able to carry out, that conversation, or, carry that melody or that tune, independent of your music ability. And so, that's something you can do yourself. Is like, hey, every so often, like, pick your favorite song, whatever the song of the moment is, or if you're listening to music, sing along for a little bit and see how that feels. And that's where I thought you were going to go, Ryan.
No, I've had that question locked and loaded ever since I knew the topic for the episode.
So what I want to do now is I want each of you to think of maybe a running highlight in particular. It could be the one that you shared earlier, or a different one where you felt like the slow, easy miles that you ran in the training cycle were really what carried the result. And so I'll give each of you a moment to think about it, and I'll share one for me. And so I ran a 10K this February. I'm actually wearing the shirt from it, and I can talk about my one gripe with this race being that my shirt says marathon, even though I raced a 10K. Or anyone asks if I ran a marathon, I have not. But, training for it, I did a lot of my training in the scheme of, the high school athletes that I'm coaching. So my workouts were kind of more geared towards what did they need for their training season. And then, a lot of it was getting up early. My body doesn't respond super great to trying to run fast workouts early in the morning. And so, it was a lot of long miles. It was some of the highest mileage that I did. And, you know, I got into the race and I looked at my watch a mile in and I said, uh-oh, because I thought it was too fast and I thought I was going to be in trouble. But those slow miles that I put in where, all of a sudden my quote recovery day, I was usually running like 8 miles on a recovery day where
Mhm.
I kind of knew, hey, no matter what my body is feeling or experiencing, I'm going to go out. I'm going to be able to get my 8 miles in. I'm going to be able to run for around an hour to 65 minutes, somewhere in there. And I really felt like I could rely on that aerobic base over the course of that 10K. And, that was able to carry me through where I didn't have super great workouts going into it because I wasn't, super specific for my workouts for training for that. But a lot of slow, easy miles, kind of like what you described earlier, Brian, for your 5K progression in college. And so that was one for me where the benefit of those slow miles carried me through on that result. And so, I had a massive PR. I PR'd by almost 3 minutes in the 10K, which is a lot. I'll pat myself
Uh-huh.
back for that. But, you talked about the ego hit earlier, Brian, sometimes when those easy runs slow down. The only run on Strava that really matters is the race day run. The results when you actually get into a race, and we'll talk more about Strava with this, but is one of you ready to go with kind of a highlight for your running where you felt like those slow miles really carried you through?
Ryan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think probably the highlight for me is you touched on this earlier, Jack, was those long runs we would do on Friday. I was doing a lot of miles back then, probably 60, close to 70 a week. And I was very well aware that if I'm pushing hard every single day, I'm going to burn out. I'm going to get sore. I'm going to get injured.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to get a lot of mileage, but not be pushing myself that hard. And so I'd, this sounds mean saying it out loud, but I'd go and knock on your door and be like, hey, do you want to run 10 miles? And we'd go and we'd gab and we'd have a nice, wonderful Friday. And it was a fantastic day. And then I'd do a second long run actually on Sunday later on that week with Skylar and Brian. That would be a bit more intense.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, like you were way faster than me at the time. You're probably still faster than me at this point. We'll see. We'll see if there's a race at some point. But yeah, I think, jokes aside there, you were intentionally making a choice of like, how do I set myself up to
Yeah.
target the purpose of this run, right? And so was there kind of a training result associated with that? I know races weren't as common during that time because it was COVID.
So I was training for the Richmond Marathon at this point, and so that was my PR. And so
Mhm.
yeah, definitely a positive result. And for what it's worth, before I seem boastful, the shoe didn't end up on the other foot with me with that, where I told one of our friends, Zach Holden, who's now an Olympic qualifier, about this, and he goes, "That's a great idea. Do you want to join me for a long run?" And I ran with him, and I was his slower chatting buddy, and it was still faster than
Yeah.
any long run I'd ever done at that point, where he was completely relaxed the entire time. So
Yeah,
that
shout
was a
out to our friend Zach, who congratulations to him, the second cycle in a row that he has hit the Olympic trials qualifier.
mhm.
I believe he ran, it was 2:14:45, I think, but I know it was under 2:15, which is just unbelievable. So a quick shout out to him and congratulations. Brian, do you have kind of a time where you felt like you already touched about college, where those easy miles kind of carried you through? Is there another place that you can think of?
Definitely. Well, a quick note on Zach. My claim to fame is we ran our first marathon together, the Philly Marathon, and we ran the first mile of that marathon together. And then he took off and finished 20 minutes ahead of me.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I would say marathon training in general, and specifically I ran the 2023 Chicago Marathon, and that's where I ran my PR. And when you're training for a fall marathon, a lot of your sort of base mileage is in the summer. And that means a lot of the mileage is going to be sort of slower, just sort of getting through the run. And so, yeah, so I think a lot of that training block was sort of slower, easy miles, getting in workouts whenever the humidity would break. And so I felt a little bit undertrained. I did not think I was in PR shape. But then the day was amazing. It's a flat course. I was running with Ryan for most of the race and ended up PRing. And I definitely attribute all the strength that I had gained from just putting in, easy mileage day after day, staying healthy, being consistent to that result.
Yeah.
Most of the race is kind. You left me at mile 10.
Well, I think everyone appreciates Brian trying to be really modest about it. But Ryan, your honesty is appreciated. But Brian, you kind of, and I think all three of us have really talked about it. And this goes back to some of the stuff that was in episode 1 of these slow, easy days are really where we're building our engine, right? We're building our aerobic capacity, our muscles are adapting, our cells are increasing their mitochondrial content, our aerobic system is improving, our blood flow is improving. I think the other thing that is really important on these days is, this is when we actually get better, right? So we
Mhm.
talk about workouts, and it's really easy to focus on workouts because, ooh, I get to run fast. But it's the recovery day in between when you actually get faster and you actually get better. It's we run the workout and our ability to run fast goes down because we ran really hard and we're tired. And it takes that recovery day for us to build our fitness back up to a higher level than it was before. And so, getting these slow miles in is just so important. It's actually the day that, you know, we get faster on those days. You both have a GPS watch. Do you all look at the prediction times on your watch at all?
I personally don't. I don't always find them really accurate.
Okay, sure.
My watch isn't fancy enough to have those, but
What watch do you have?
I have a Garmin Forerunner 35.
Oh, I think that's like the series before they added it in. Okay. Brian, you said you don't always feel like those predictions are accurate. What do you feel like it overestimates, underestimates?
Well, I think I personally don't. I'm not a naturally fast runner, but I've just built up a lot of endurance over 17 years of running. And
Mhm.
so sometimes I'll be able to sort of hold a certain pace at, half marathon or marathon. And then it tells me your mile pace should be this. And I think to myself, there is no way I've got the speed to run that. Now I do think there can be the closer the races are to each other, I think the more accurate they're going to be. If you run a 5K and it tells you your 3K is a certain time, you know, that might be generally accurate. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think trying to predict wide spreads, from
Yeah.
mile to marathon, I think doesn't always work.
Yeah. I agree with that. I bring it up not because I think that those predictions are necessarily super accurate. For example, earlier this year, it projected that my marathon would be like a 2:57, which, to be clear, there's not a chance I was going to run a 2:57 when my longest run in my training cycle had been a 15-mile run. That's just not going to happen. It was relatively good for my 5K and 10K predictions, but the thing that I find interesting is, it adjusts on like a daily basis sometimes, like a per run
Mhm.
basis. And I wouldn't run a workout and see the predictions change. I would run an easy day and I would see the predictions change, which I think is really interesting. And I think part of that is, a lot of that data is going to be tied into its measured heart rate for you, right? And so we talked about, that generally we talked about that zone 2 running idea. We talked about, Ryan, you said, "Hey, how aware of your heart rate are you? You know, do we need to slow down? Are we getting too fast?" And I think it looks at and recognizes this principle of, hey, low heart rate for a sustained amount of time is actually what's going to be building our engine capacity so that we can fine tune it with those workouts later on. And so that's why I bring it up. Not that it's like gold or anything and that they're super accurate, but it's just something that I find interesting and, that ties into what we're talking about. So we talk about the slow runs really building our engine, and it's kind of our bread and butter as runners. You have both mentioned things that I kind of want to get back to and I want to touch on. And so the first one is this idea of group running and the talk test. You should be able to carry a conversation. And something that I think is really great for this is obviously having a group of people to run with. One of those places that we have the most access to that is in these kind of run clubs or run groups. Brian, are you involved with any run clubs or run groups right now, or is most of your training on your own?
Unfortunately, I'm not. I live in sort of rural Virginia, and there aren't a whole lot of runners around. So most of my running is solo. And I miss it. I miss being part of a running club. Being part of UVA's running club is one of the best sort of running experiences of my life. So
Yeah. So you mentioned the club team, right? And so that's where we were teammates. That's where we were friends. And this ties back into something that Ryan said earlier about pace pushing within a group. One of the reasons I was really excited to have the two of you on for this is because that was something we really struggled with on our team. You know, there were a lot of people that kind of were there for different reasons or training for different things, trying to accomplish, different outcomes. And so we would get these easy runs where all of a sudden we look down at the watch and we're running like 550 pace back from, for the last like 4 miles of a 10-mile run. And it's like, oh my goodness, what are we doing? And so I'm going to go to Ryan first on this one. Ryan, what advice would you give someone that is running with a group and all of a sudden just kind of finds themselves in that spot where I'm overly aware of my heart rate, my breathing's getting really intense, maybe my form's breaking down. It's like I know that I'm running too fast, but I'm with a group right now. What advice would you give them?
I mean, that's a tough question. There's obviously like the peer pressure of it all is that you don't want to, you know, admit to struggling. And I've dealt with that. I think you have to consider the context. Like if you're at a run club where people say like, hey, we're going to be if you're setting out to run a specific pace, like in college, I think like we had a 7:30 pace group, let's say. I don't know if we had exact number, but you could like, if you're in that situation, if you're going too fast, you could say like, hey, this pace is a little hot. This is too quick. Let's pull it back. And some people I hope will, but if not, there's always no shame in slowing down if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
All the run clubs that I've been a part of now have like pace leaders. They also have sweepers in the back to take care of people who fall behind.
Yeah, you came in the year that we implemented that. That was one of the things that I wanted to bring in was kind of those pace groups. And I probably counted on the two of you at different times to do that, to kind of lead those pace groups, lead the routes, or be a sweeper. Brian, what would you say to, like, if you're in that group, how do you maybe communicate with other runners? Like, how do you communicate on behalf of yourself, but then how do you also advocate for kind of the group as a whole, or what is the intention of the run?
yeah, that's a good question. So I think one, just being aware of who is in the group and the sort of pace goals that, sometimes people are going to be a lot faster because they're, a lot fitter or they've been running for longer. And so that might be a case where maybe you need to break off and sort of form your own group.
Right.
And for me, as someone in that position of being sort of a pace leader, I would always just try to assess, okay, how is everyone sounding? Is anyone sounding like they're really struggling, or are they in the back of the group and you can tell they're sort of like, there's some difficulty sort of maintaining contact. And yeah, I think that's a case where, you can verbally just say like, hey, let's like try to cool it down,
Mm-hmm.
going to the front of the group and just physically slowing down the pace. And when all else fails, just sort of going to the back of the group and just running with that person, even if the rest of the group breaks away. In my experience, most running clubs, it's a really good culture, and so even though there is that competitiveness, it's full of lots of really good people, and so I
Yep.
think if someone is genuinely struggling, if you're just honest and say that, I think you're gonna find someone who's willing to sort of ease off the pace and run with you.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I actually really like what you said about getting to the front of the group and slowing it down. And, a sneaky opportunity to do that is when you hit a stoplight.
Yeah.
And so, people ask me all the time, they're like, "Oh, you're at a stoplight. Like, shouldn't you be like jogging in place, or shouldn't you cross right away?" And so, one, I always say, and a lot of this is because a lot of my running happens with high school athletes where I'm responsible for their safety, but we are never jaywalking. We are never illegally crossing the street. Two, like we pace push a little bit in those situations, and that's an opportunity for like, hey, let's regain control of that group. And so we would do that a lot of, hey, we get to a stoplight and I am making an intentional effort to slow the pace down. You mentioned listening to people. When I'm
Hmm.
coaching someone and I can tell that, hey, we're getting a little out of control, and I've probably said this to the two of you at different points when I was helping you all out, was take 2 deep breaths, right? Like, slow
Yeah.
things down, force your body to settle a little bit. But a sneaky opportunity to do that would actually be at street crossings and things like that.
I've also I've tied my shoe before to slow down groups.
Oh, that's
Like,
great. Like,
yeah,
you
like
just stop and say, "Hey, my shoe's untied."
I've done that. Yes.
I love that. That's incredible.
Not yeah, like not even sometimes like sometimes for me, but sometimes for other people that I could tell
Yeah.
were just like struggling just to yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's great, and, like, because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to go fast. Brian, you mentioned earlier kind of the pace hit in the ego when you compare, like, your January running to your June running, and, I think a lot of running has transitioned to social media now, whether, you're seeing running content online or you're following someone's training on probably the big platform is Strava, where you can really see other people's training. And so, Brian, how do you handle kind of balancing what you're seeing and how that affects your running when you look at athletes that and you see them doing certain things, or you see things labeled as like, oh, easy day, but they're running like 630 miles for 12 miles. And you're like, I don't know. Like, how do you handle all of that?
Sure. So there are certainly times when it's hard. If I see a lot of my friends ran a race and they all did amazingly, there's
Yeah.
this feeling of, oh, I missed out. Or, if you and a friend are training for the same race and you see that they crushed a workout, I've seen Ryan crush some workouts and, I'm running an easy day. And, it's natural to feel a little bit like down, like, oh, like I want to be doing that right now. And to
Hmm.
feel like you're not doing enough somehow. But I think, yeah, as with so many social media platforms, you're not getting reality. You're getting this very curated version, and you can't compare your average day or your bad day to somebody else's great day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think again, trying to understand the context. When you see someone's run on Strava, you have no idea how hard they were pushing, what the
Hmm.
weather was like. There's so much that goes into that you don't know, just sort of sitting there on your couch looking at that on your phone. And so I think trying to keep all of that in mind. And then also keeping in mind that everyone's running journey is a little bit different. Some people have longer training blocks to get to a certain place. Some people might be coming back from an injury. If you're a newer runner, you can't compare yourself if you've only been running for, 3 or 4 months to someone who's been
Hmm.
running for 3 or 4 years. That's going to take a while to sort of build up the natural endurance to get to that point. So I think just trying to stay true to what you're doing and your plan. Listen to your body, listen to your coach, and try as much as possible to sort of tune out the noise of social media.
Yeah, we had a friend that I thought was particularly good at that, of not caring what anyone else thought on easy days, and I thought Logan was always really good at that. So we had a
Uh-huh.
friend that he was probably one of our 2 or 3 fastest 5K runners, and he was always one of our top cross country performers, and he would routinely run 8 to 8:30 on his easy day. And this is someone that was running under 15:30 for 5K. I want to say he was under 26 for 8K. I would have to ask him, but I know I think he was pushing like 25:30, which is unbelievable. And, this is a high level athlete that on his easy day, he's running 8-minute miles. He's running 8:30 miles. Ryan, what is your relationship with Strava like in terms of, watching, maybe some of your old teammates or old friends that, they're doing training, and how do you kind of respond and react to that?
I mean, I try to look at it as inspiration, especially when I see people do run a great time. Like we had our friend Trevor who ran I think sub 250 at Paris, and it was an incredible run. And that's one of my all time life goals. And prior to this, his PR was slower than mine. And so there's the first like tinge of like, oh, that's jealousy, he beat me. But then it was like, well, this is someone who's, roughly my speed. And look what he accomplished. That means I can accomplish it too. And so I text him and say like, hey, what sort of workouts are you running? Like, what are you doing? And I try to use it as a learning experience to see how other people are training and how I can try to incorporate what works into what I'm doing.
Yeah, if I can build on that, I think, as with many social media platforms, I think being intentional about who you're following, I think, is really key. The people I'm following on Strava are all friends of mine. And so, yeah, I feel the same way, where when I see them succeed, it feels really inspirational and I'm rooting for them. I think if you're in a situation where you're following all of your rivals, then that sort of creates this dynamic where if you see them do well, it might make you feel bad because you feel like you're not at that level. And so, yeah, I think just sort of being intentional with the people that you're
Mhm.
following.
Yeah, I think being intentional with who you're following is super important. One, with like the people around you, the people that you know personally. But then also, I mean, let's face it, we are in the era of influencers. There is endless running content because the track and the running world has really blown up over the last probably 3 to 4, maybe 5 years. It's just really taken off. And there's so much info and messaging out there about here's what to do, the magic way to get better, like run this session to run a sub 25K and things like that. And, Brian, you touched on it in your first response. What is your context? Like, it's your journey. Like, what
Mhm.
is your context? What do you need to do? What would be considered a success for you? And so, I think right now the three of us are all in a spot where we are in a place in our running journey where we know what is a success for us. We know what a good day looks like, and we know what reasonable goals are. For beginner runners, I think this is where it can be really helpful to have a coach, have someone that can contextualize what that running journey looks like and how sometimes that running journey can be really slow. And then sometimes that running journey just takes off. It snowballs, everything comes together. And I talked about my 10K in February. I had one of my first periods of my fitness just took off on me this past year, where, I felt like I could have run a PR in anything from a mile up. And, you know, it was really just these like, hey, a whole bunch of these slow runs where I'm building that base and just, carrying on those adaptations day after day after day. And it just really takes off. And so, being consistent, talked about it in episode 1 and in episode 2, like setting yourself up for consistency, but then also what is your context? What is your situation? And, to kind of tie everything together, I do want to give advice for the new runner, which is run your journey, run your pace, really try and zero in on your experience. And, Brian, you kind of went through that my start of running journey on my own. What are maybe some things that really helped you take steps forward in that journey? And then what are, hey, avoid this at all costs?
It's a good question. I would say, yeah, I think finding a coach is really crucial because there's so much information out there and there's so many running fads, especially nowadays with all these influencers. So yeah, I think trying to find a coach, someone who has the experience that you don't have yet, who can help guide your journey and help sort of structure training for you. I mean, I think I think there's a lot of benefit in reading. I mean, again, I think contextualizing it is really important. Don't rush out and buy the latest influencer's book, but I think you can take a lot of inspiration from reading the stories of, some of the professional runners and seeing that their careers had ups and downs. Progress, we want and wish that progress could be linear, but it never is. Injuries interrupt our training. We deal with plateaus all the time. And, that can be frustrating if you don't have context for it. But if you realize that every single runner, even the best runners on the planet, have plateaus and have injuries, and, everyone started from somewhere. So yeah, I think just kind of getting, reading a lot, finding a good, coach who could help guide your journey. I think those are real keys.
Ryan?
Sorry, I was just thinking about, have you ever thought about naming the podcast The Consistent Stride?
I have not, no.
Is that too late to change it?
That'd be inconsistent.
I don't think it would be too late to change it. One of the reasons that I wanted to name it The Vertical Stride is I kind of think of all the levels of running, as like steps on a ladder, right? So you're taking these steps up. And really what I think is so important but overlooked in that running spectrum is that the ideas and the principles are the same for everyone, right? So what's going to make the three of us faster is the same thing that's going to make the beginner runner faster. And it's the same thing that's going to make, our people like our friend Zach, who are Olympic trial qualifiers. It's the same thing that's going to make, professional runners faster. It's the same thing that's going to make the high school student faster. And, I think, this idea that we're talking about right now of what is your context, that is the biggest struggle that I have with high school athletes when I coach them, is to focus on what is your context right here, right now. And then Ryan, to your point of, hey, maybe it should have been named The Consistent Stride. Like, how can you show up every day and be consistent in your context? And if you're able to do that, then you will take these steps up this ladder.
Vertical.
So yeah, vertical, that was my thought behind the name. But, Ryan's always been a little cleverer with words than I have. So
Yours is catchier, I think.
But Ryan, did you have kind of any advice to add on to this for our beginner runners?
I think Brian summed it up.
I think Brian summed it up. Well, so then I'll ask you this question, Ryan. So maybe what is something that we talked about today that you think, hey, maybe I could go give an experienced runner a reminder about this? Or what was maybe a helpful reminder for you today? Or something that, it's not new information, but you're like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Like I need to, re-emphasize that in my thought process.
I mean, I think just the biggest marker, like the biggest indicator of improvement in running is availability, and just being able to be consistent and be able to go out there every day, and trying to avoid injury and trying to avoid burnout is the biggest parts of that. And being able to run slow and being able to run controlled are invaluable skills to make sure that you're going to remain available and that you're not going to burn yourself out and that you're still going to enjoy running day after day.
Yeah.
And
I think we might have just
that's
gotten a soundbite of the episode there. Brian, do you have anything for kind of that experienced veteran runner that, if you went and talked to like an experienced run group tomorrow, you might remind them of, or something that you're going to maybe, think about going forward on the next couple weeks of your training?
Yeah, to build on what Ryan said, consistency really is key. And when I say consistency, I mean both running frequently, but also staying healthy. Sometimes it's better to take a step back, to take a day or two off if it means staying healthy. To give you an example from my own training and how Strava can be sort of this trap, I've been sort of steadily increasing my mileage as I prepare for the Indianapolis Marathon. And, I ran 60 miles one week, 61 miles the next, 62 miles the next, just kind of gradually ratcheting it up. And I started sort of thinking about how great that Strava graph is going to look as my mileage went, steadily upward week after week. And then yesterday I felt a little bit of pain. It didn't feel too serious, but I had that thought of, do I push through this so I can keep that beautiful Strava graph going? And then sort of realized that no, the smartest and safest decision is to take some time off, let my body recover, ruin the Strava graph, but keep myself healthy and therefore able to keep training. So
Yeah. No, I think that's really good of, you know, don't let the outward appearance on Strava sacrifice the later results. And so, we kind of talked about there's really the only one Strava post that matters, which is that race day result. And the only thing that matters there is it a success for you? Right. So, you know, if I went and ran a marathon, like what was a success for me would be different than what's a success for the two of you, right? Because different contexts, right? You all have run several marathons. That is the thing that you're training for. That hasn't been my focus recently in my running journey. So, I shouldn't look at someone that is focused on something completely different and apply that to me. And so having
Mhm.
that view of what are you trying to accomplish is super important. And so for beginner runners, I just kind of want to bring everything back together of focus on yourself. Okay. Make sure that your day-to-day recovery runs are slow. We have the talk test, right? Could you carry a conversation? Even if you can't carry a conversation, right? Because sometimes running is just hard. Be mindful of your heart rate, be mindful of your breathing. Okay, those are kind of the tests there. Or if you're running by yourself, could you sing a little bit of a song, right? That's a good way to kind of keep those runs easy. And then for our returning runners, calm down, consistency, be available. Long stretches of training are what's going to make you better. I think this has been a lot of really good discussion about this slow to go fast idea. Are there any final thoughts from the two of you?
yeah, so some advice for beginning runners. I would say everyone's running journey looks differently, and what I've encountered sometimes is new runners sometimes feel reluctant to call themselves a runner. They compare themselves to other people that are more experienced or that are running longer races, and they think, "Well, I'm not a runner." And my advice there is to say you absolutely are. Everyone who runs is a runner, no matter how far they're going or how fast they're going. And, your journey is your own journey. So whether you started running at the age of 10 or the age of 70, what you're doing is amazing. And be patient with yourself, like run slow, enjoy your surroundings, fall in love with running, and you will get better and you'll really enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
I think that was great. I'm going to pair that very motivational advice with some biological advice that if you feel your heart rate going too fast, one trick that I've always learned is you can exhale as long as you can, just keep blowing air out until it feels like your lungs are empty, and that'll drop your heart rate down a noticeable bit. I don't know the science behind it, but I do know that it works. So feel free to try that out.
How often do you find yourself doing that, Ryan?
Probably once a month.
Once a month. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I know that I'll have runs where I just kind of like, oh my goodness. All right, I need to take a deep breath. I need to settle down and just like really get things back under control. But I want to thank our guests, Ryan and Brian. We did not have a Coach's Corner submission this week. However, I do think we got a lot of really good advice that people can apply to themselves to kind of serve that place of Coach's Corner. And I almost think it might even be a little serendipitous that on this day where we want to talk about taking your own personal context and experience, that we don't look at someone else's plan where you might go try and apply that to yourself. And so be mindful of your runs, be mindful of your effort, stay consistent, and happy running.